Good afternoon, everybody, depending on, I guess, where you are in the world. For those of you who are not in the Washington, D.C. area and covered under about 4 to 6 inches of snow, welcome. It's been a dynamic morning with all of the various closings going on around town. But rain, snow, sleet, any of that, we keep going. So I'm excited to have everybody here. It's a very small group today, which is certainly fine. We want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to ask questions, to interact with our guests, to make sure that that you learn or share your ideas or have an opportunity to contribute to our CoLabs. These are about all of you. So our CoLabs are developed in order to help you understand what we mean by science experience and to invite you into developing science experiences on your own, for yourself, for your clients, for your organizations and research labs. So what is a science experience? As we define it, is this measure of, or this twinning of both science and design, of user experience and science communication. Science-related content, products, or events designed with human-centered design thinking principles and user experience strategies to delight, inform, and engage audiences. Or in other words, science communication that doesn't need to use the word science in its communication. In previous CoLab that we had, CoLab04 last time, it was about science and storytelling being really the research story as the nucleus of the experiences, the outreach, and the communication through various channels that orbit in and around your story, but your story is really the nucleus. Where today we're talking about how design affects all of those various channels to carry and share your story to your audience, your targeted audience, those that you're trying to reach, and what, as we call it, a call to action, or what it is we want people to do when they experience the science communication that you give them. So it would be very difficult to really, in 1 hour, define what science is, or I'm sorry, what design is. Design has 1,000 faces. It is different things to different people, depending on whether you're the designer or you're the audience. And if you ask 100 people what is design, you'll get 101 or 102 different answers. Saul Bass, who is an iconic designer and filmmaker, defined design as thinking made visual. And one of my favorite quotes is actually by a gentleman, Robert Peters, also a designer and an educator, who said that design creates culture. Culture shapes values. Values determine the future. So in that, does design create the future and shape the future? As designers, we believe yes. Design thinking is a method for creative problem solving, but also an opportunity to shape the future. Just to give a brief short story about design and science, just a little over a year ago, an astrophysicist reached out to Spacetime Labs, a gentleman by the name of Paul Matt Sutter. And you may have heard of Paul. He has Ask a Spaceman YouTube channel. He's also a frequent guest and contributor on space.com. And he's a frequent guest on Fraser Cain's universetoday.com. And I think Paul even has space radio through CBE radio in Columbus. He's an astrophysicist at Ohio State University, but he's also the chief scientist at the Center of Science and Industry in Columbus, Ohio. So he reached out to me just about a year or so ago at Spacetime Labs, looking for some advice and ways that we might be able to work together in order to grow his audience. And not just on Facebook, but in social media and elsewhere, his science communication audience. And so we kind of entered into a bit of a collab. His budget wasn't very big, and that's never a problem for us. We try to find a way in order to engage and help any way we can. So we had weekly conversations about what his communication efforts were, what he was doing, ways that he might be able to kind of increase reach with the content that he's creating, because content is a really important part. That's the vessel in which your communication carries to your audience in all different shapes and forms. And so we continued to talk week after week. There was obviously a big solar eclipse coming up within a few months or so of us talking. And so he had developed with the CoSci Center a tour group down to Nashville in order to view in that path of totality for the solar eclipse. It also just happened that he was in frequent touch with folks at the Weather Channel. And about 2 months before the solar eclipse, I believe it's 2 months before the solar eclipse, every Tuesday morning, he was being interviewed as the subject matter expert with the folks at the Weather Channel, talking about the upcoming solar eclipse. And in one of our conversations, I said, Paul, what you should really do is talk to them about, you bringing a big audience to Nashville from the CoSci Center would be really great. They would enjoy having a live audience, perhaps, maybe so, yada, yada. One thing leads to another. He gets invited to be the co-anchor of the Weather Channel's coverage of the solar eclipse in Nashville. We continued talking a little bit more about, again, growing the audience, the subject matter expert profile. And that's when I totally had no idea. He mentions this tour group that he and Fraser Kane from Universe Today are taking to Iceland. And he said, this is this idea of, an astronomy tour. Astrotourism is big. We thought we would go ahead and do this, hunting aurora borealis and astronomy photography. Well, I said, Paul, that's a great idea. Let me spend a few minutes, because I think there's a lot more here to just that. They had sold out within about 3 weeks or so of announcing their tour to Iceland, and they had only announced it within their networks, within their small channels, their subscribers, their closest fans. Sold out within about 3 weeks, and that was about 8 months ahead of the actual tour. This all started to sound really, really interesting to me. So I said, Paul, give me a day, give me 24 hours. And I went to my lean business model canvas, which is like a business plan. If you look up lean business model canvas, there are some downloads. Very interesting tool for you to test your idea on, should this be a business or is this a hobby? Well, what we had in 24 hours was something neither of us really had intended when we first started talking with each other. It was an opportunity to introduce a new genre of travel. Experience travel is very, very popular. Eco travel, adventure tourism, even Airbnb has launched its experiences as an add-on to Airbnb homes. And we went through this process of asking ourselves the hard questions. Is this a business or a hobby? We went through our lean business model canvas, this design thinking canvas. And sure enough, we have launched a pilot program for 2018 that included Iceland in February. We have an astronomy cruise in September, and that is limited availability. And then we have the Atacama Desert in Chile. That I think that one has indeed sold out. So we met all of our goals for our 2018 partner project about 2 weeks ago. And we are now looking at moving into 2019 with now 7 tours. And we have launched our website for Astro Tours as a partnership project. Our Zen is that we're not just a small planet in the universe, we're the universe on a small planet. And we have some exciting tours for 2019 that include Ireland and Costa Rica. We will be going back to the Atacama Desert for the solar eclipse in 2019. And that will also be the path of totality going through that desert, which is a dark sky preserve. So it'll be pretty exciting, pretty cool opportunity to witness a solar eclipse, a kind of a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. But I want to show you just a quick little video that we had created in order to reach out to folks about our Atacama Desert. And so this was a really cool opportunity to bring design thinking into a science communication. The idea that we can communicate science. It's almost easier to get that point across if we can bring people into the science and give them an experience, an opportunity to see themselves in this natural wonder around them, to be inspired by it, to want to learn more about that science on their own, to kind of start with a little bit of the science fiction, enough to inspire them, to where you leave a little door open and they can go discover the science for themselves. And design is that opportunity. So to talk a little bit more about design and science, data visualization, user experience, design thinking, the list goes on, I want to start bringing in our guest now. And Eric Rodenbeck is the creative director and founder of Stamen Design in San Francisco, California. And Eric, when you get a chance, if you could turn your camera on and your microphone and join us. I see a space opening up on there. He is. With the keep calm and carry on in the background is adequate. I think very appropriate. So everybody say hello to Eric. Eric, before we kind of get into some questions, if you would, just maybe give us a little background and just tell us about Stamen Design, how it got started, where you were in the beginning, and how you got here. Not how you got here on the CoLab, but how you got to where you are now, right?
Yeah, sure. Happy to do that. My name's Eric. Hello, everybody. I'm as Nick mentioned, I'm the CEO and the creative director of Stamen Design. It gives you a sense of the kind of company that we are. I had worked at a number of other companies before where the CEO and the creative director were two different people, and I started to notice that every time the CEO and the creative director disagreed, that the CEO would win. And I thought, why don't I just be both of those and see what happens? And so that was in 2001 that I started the firm. I'd had a number of experiences in the kind of early .com boom of telling stories with data and using data visualization as a storytelling tool. We were doing some work with some sports events, actually tracing the journey of around the world sailboat races. These kind of competitive, almost qualifying races for the America's Cup. And for the first time, this was way back in 1997, they were putting GPS sensors on the boats and sailing them all around the world. And I was asked to tell stories about that epic sailing journey. And I just kind of never let it go. That feeling of being able to kind of reach all the way across the world and tell somebody a fantastic story about an amazing thing with just data as an entertainment experience has just kind of stuck with me. So when it came time to start my own firm in 2001, I called it Stamen because I love the idea of a kind of pollination happening and a kind of flourishing of the world. And since then, we've been designing with data and designing with data visualizations for everybody from UC Berkeley to the Dalai Lama to Facebook to the World Health Organization.
Hold on. Go back. The Dalai Lama has data?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a little science in everything, everyone. That's a clear indication that connection between design and science is ancient. But yeah, keep going. That we'll come back to that. But the data of the Dalai Lama,
Yeah,
interesting.
it's an interesting story, and I'm happy to talk about it. And that project is actually a science project. So
Oh,
when it's
very
time,
cool.
we can get into it.
Yeah. Oh, that's great.
So I'll just sort of wrap it up by saying that my professional life has been about the communication of data and with data through visuals. And just as Nick was saying with some of these things, that this idea of thinking made visual, and this idea of data made visual, and this idea of stories made visual as a way to tell a different kind of story has been a preoccupation of mine for about 20 years.
Wow. Well, and lucky for us, because here you are, because we have a mutual friend, Sarah El Shafi. Unfortunately, she couldn't make it today. She's running a storytelling symposium out there out of Berkeley. She said, you know, when I told her about this collab, she said, you really should reach out to Eric Rodenbeck. And I said, you know, yeah, let's do that. And so in asking this question, how important is design for communication? When you answer that, I want you to talk a little bit about the Dalai Lama's data, because that's just too important to glass over. So,
Yeah,
how important
I'll
is
start.
design for communication?
Yeah, maybe I'll start with that story about His Holiness. I feel like I should have the picture that they took of the two of us doing a design critique behind me
Oh,
instead of the keep calm and carry on.
I will tell folks right now. I'm putting up Stamen.com. That's the website, so you can take a look. It's a great picture. It's one of my favorite pictures on your website.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Well, I'll just tell that story first, and then is that all right, Nick? Okay.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
So we've been designing with maps for quite a while, and was lucky enough to get an article about maps and data visualization and me in the New York Times a couple of years ago. And I was approached by an older guy named Paul Ekman, who I hadn't really heard of before. It turns out that he is old school enough that he still reads the New York Times paper every day. And he saw the article about me and thought about me for a project that he was working on. And he came into my office and he said, "Hey, I'm looking for somebody to help me design a map of human emotions for the Dalai Lama. What do you think?" And I thought about it for about 4 seconds, and I said, "I have no idea what that means or how that could happen, but of course I'm interested. I'll do it right away." And it turns out that he is one of the better known psychologists in the world. He discovered the relationship between emotions, human emotions, and facial expressions. He had a number of different TV shows about this work, including Lie to Me. And he was, after 9/11, he was tapped by Homeland Security to do facial recognition of liars and things like that. But he, through that work, became acquainted with the Dalai Lama. Those guys are the same age. He calls them his brother from another mother, and they have gotten together on a number of occasions to talk about their different worldviews. Paul is a world-renowned scientist, and the Dalai Lama is a Dalai Lama, and so they've got different ideas about emotions and how they work, and what they basically just have different worldviews. And so what they do is they get together every year or two, and they have a conversation that lasts a couple hours, and then a book comes out the other side. And so the Dalai Lama and Paul have been learning from each other about their different emotional states and about their different worldviews. And the Dalai Lama decided that he didn't want to just communicate to his own people. You know, there's people that will just listen to him because of who he is, but he also wanted to communicate to atheists, to non-Buddhists, to scientists. And so that's what he asked Paul to do, was to come up with a way of expressing the emotional work visually. So what we did was to sit with Paul and to go through the 60 years of scientific research that he did and that he had done, and develop with him an atlas of how human emotions work. So the data there comes from his years of work studying everybody from people in labs here in California to people in Papua New Guinea in the 50s and gauging their emotional reactions. And it's a fascinating data set. Paul says some really amazing things about it. He says, so for example, one of the things is that it's easier to study fear than it is to study sadness, or we know a lot more about fear than we know about sadness. those are the two of the emotions that we were talking about, because it's a lot easier to reliably frighten somebody in a lab than it is to reliably make them sad. And this idea that these emotions that Paul is studying from a scientific perspective, have parts of them that are extremely well known and parts of them that they just really don't know very much about, was a really intriguing and exciting part of the work for us.
That's fascinating. That's really great. And so how do you discover, I mean, obviously these are clients and individuals who reach out to you at different levels of interest and inquiry. But how do you start that process of design in discovering what your client's unique needs are? There's no blanket, there's no kind of one question fits all, I'm sure. But what is the process that you have that you begin to start this process of design over at Stamen with your clients?
Well, as you can probably guess, it's different for different clients. We have about 50 of them a year. And so, we've got everybody from, people whose data sets are extremely well organized and ready to go, and then some who need us to go out and get the data for them. And I've tried to wrap my arms around that whole entirety of the practice. I sometimes get frustrated when I hear people in my field talk about needing the data to be clean in order for them to get started working. It's just never the case, and there's always work that needs to be done. So we the first step is we take a look and see kind of where along the spectrum of data readiness our clients are. As an example of somebody who sort of sits right there in the middle, we did a project with the metagenomics lab at UC Berkeley, and metagenomics is a fascinating topic. What they do is they take genetic samples from environments like killer whales' mouths, or from acid leach fields, or from radioactive spills, and they swipe them and then basically sample all the DNA that's in that environment. So they wind up with these incredibly complex models of environments and all the different creatures and how they relate to one another. And this one does photosynthesis, and this one does some other process. And so essentially what they have is they get this swab of data, and then they use visualization to try and understand that data set and how all those organisms interrelate with one another. So that's an example of a client that had a lot of data, but their main problem was that because they're in a university, the only people that were actually building the visualizations were grad students who would cycle in and out after 2 years, and everything had just gotten clunky and big and strange and weird, and there was no way to query it. So our process is to come in and look at that, and from a design perspective, not from a graphic design perspective, but from a kind of systems design perspective, help them understand better ways that they can display, work with, download, visualize the data that they have.
That's a very critical distinction to make, that between the design thinking, which is really an analysis kind of process, and systems thinking, which is really kind of a synthesis and bringing those things together and kind of finding where that string goes. The systems think which is more difficult or which comes first, depends on the practice, depends on the organization, perhaps in a lot of different ways. But interesting distinction between design analysis and systems synthesis, I think.
Well, and for me, the fun part about data visualization is that it touches all aspects of it. I mean, you've got to do everything from communication design to scientific research to graphic design to interaction design. I mean, it's very much still, I thought when I first started doing this work, this was a few years before Google Maps came out, and I thought, when Google Maps came out, I thought, oh no, we're screwed. They're done. We're like, there's no more work to do, and within a couple of years, Google is just going to take it all. And I'm very luckily wrong.
Yeah. Quite the opposite, I think, in a lot of ways too, right? There are a lot of companies who have really made mapping logistics and all of the GIS data that's out there. I can think a few of them off the top of my head that are just doing some. Mapbox is one of those companies that I think is just absolutely killing it. They're a great team, super talented, super smart, and the visualizations. And this is a product that they let others use as well. It's fascinating kind of stuff, really. But kind of brings me around to what the question of, because I think some designers here have, and other scientists and attendees here may have that mindset that design is a website, is a logo, infographics. They wouldn't be wrong, but that's really just the tip of the iceberg, what's above the waterline, and what they see. All of the research, everything else that happens below the waterline in design is not as apparent. That design thinking, that systems thinking, right? So how do you apply those skills and services in design to solve problems for your clients?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing is, I was talking to a bunch of cardiologists the other day, and cardiologists are not known for their humility. The people that open your heart and hold your life in their hands. And so, it was interesting to talk to them. I was brought in as a speaker to help them with some design problems that they're having. And the first thing is just to let them know that there is this thing that they don't know about called design, right? That it's not like we're talking about a couple different logos. And it's always challenging when you try and sort of, I wouldn't want to puff up my own sense of self-importance with these cardiologists who are amazing, but I do think there's a way to talk to them and to realize that there are biases in the way that they think, that if they try to then go and communicate that out to the rest of the world, because the public doesn't have the same kind of embedded knowledge that they have about their work, right. The key pieces are just going to be missing. And this happened to me the other day with Sarah El-Shafi, where I'm writing a paper for her scientific paper, and the first thing that I wanted to know when I was reading the guidelines was, how long does the paper need to be? And I couldn't find it in any of the documentation. There was no indication anywhere of the most basic question.
That's a designer question, 100% right there. That's give me some parameters, right? That's a total designer question. I love it. Yeah.
So I think that's the kind of first piece that we do, is we try to establish, because I don't want there to be this kind of mythic thing called design that's kind of monolithic and only the sort of fancy people with the black glasses know how to do it. It's much more about taking the time to step back and like, let's think about the kind of people that you're trying to communicate with, and let's just run through some assumptions that you might have about them. That's kind of the heart of it, or the beginning of it, is just kind of getting to a very, very humble place. Because in my work, like, I don't know the first thing about cardiology, but part of what I'm good at as a designer is learning the things that I need to learn quickly about things that I'm totally ignorant of.
Yeah. Interesting.
And there's a lot that I'm ignorant of.
Yeah, well, I'm going to raise my hand for that too. I think as we have interacted with an awful lot of scientists at different levels, from principal investigators, and talking with no private investigators were involved, by the way.
Not yet.
Yeah. And, those that are responsible for development at various academic research institutions, it runs the gamut. What we've discovered is that in this belief, in this idea that only scientists can communicate science, which I think is absolutely, a barrier for them in order to get their outreach more adopted. There are certain aspects to their science that absolutely the scientist is required, is very, very important. But in terms of the principles of communication, design, those kind of things, I wouldn't expect a scientist to have that information or knowledge. I think it's wonderful when they do. I think it's wonderful when scientists want to be, and many of that we've encountered are very DIY minded, and we want to give them the tools so that they can do it. But you are a scientist, full time. So do you want another part-time job? And so it's very difficult, to do that because when it comes down to all of that, all of the communication, all of the research, developing your hypothesis on how you want to do that, that process, and then developing your theory that you then launch out there, we have deliverables. Because that's 9 times out of 10 what they, need to have at the end of that work is something that gets displayed to the public or sent out to the public, whether it's a video or it's a graphic or if it's in social media or some form of content. What are some of the formats, file types, and channels that you deliver your design to?
So I just looked over at my other laptop and I got a message that a project of ours with the Audubon Society has just launched as of this moment. So maybe it's a good chance to talk about that. It's we've been doing some work with them around climate science, and the thinking is that climate change is sort of too big a topic to really wrap your head around, especially if you're a member of the public. So what the Audubon Society has done is say, let's go find a charismatic actor like a bird and talk about the effect of climate change on that animal.
Right. Yeah.
That people care about. So the idea being that, you've been watching the loons come to your summer house every week, every year for your whole life, but in 20 years, the loons will not be there. They'll be somewhere else.
Yeah.
And so this specific project right now is a mapping of the birds in national parks and the birds that will, the new birds that will be introduced to parks as climate change happens, and the birds that will be extirpated from those parks. So, you've been going to Yellowstone every year for 20 years with your family. You're not going to see the same kind of birds there in the future as you see now, and you're going to see new birds, right? And so it gets very specific. And then there's always an integration challenge and all that. So what we're delivering for them very specifically are maps and visualizations that show this many birds are going to be here, this many birds are not going to be here, and this many birds are going to stay. And so it's a kind of combination of mapping work that we'll do with whatever application is at hand. Sometimes we write them ourselves and sometimes not. So in this case, it's a giant bag of GIFs that are all named after the different birds. And it's also a set of G3 JavaScript wrappers that are wrapping up the visualizations. And it's a file format that is kind of less. The file format in this case is almost less important than just the name of the file. Like if it's not named Ruby Warbler, you'll never find it because there's hundreds of them, right? So
sure.
So part of it is a kind of systems design process where it's just even the nomenclature has to be really carefully thought through.
Very cool. Is that project available for the public right now, online or somewhere? Or
I will post a link into the channel.
Yeah, that would be great because I know a lot of people here would be very interested to see the visual of which you speak. That's neat. That's really cool. Hey, while we're doing that, I'm gonna bring Hunter Whitney in. Hunter, if you're there, you can go ahead and turn on your camera and your mic and join us. Takes just a couple seconds once he does that for the system to kind of recognize that Hunter is there.
Yeah.
There we go. You're coming on. I see the space. Great. There you go. Excellent. Hi, Hunter. Everybody, this is Hunter Whitney. He is also in San Francisco, Mountain View, Palo Alto.
You're sort of getting close. It's Redwood Shores, Redwood City.
Gotcha. Excellent.
Right in the middle of those.
Hunter is an independent consultant. He's also an instructor at UC Davis, Coursera, Berkeley, sorry, and is author 2 books now on user experience and data visualization.
1 book and a chapter in another book.
Excellent. Fantastic. Yeah, that's great. So it's really cool. We've had Hunter on here before when at one of our earlier collabs. We try to talk as often as possible and has always been very helpful to our audience in talking about user experience design and architecture, information architecture, and data visualization, which is what your books and your writing's been about. To kind of get started in that, coming off of the discussion that we've just had with Eric, how do you begin with developing an experience with data? It's a loaded question. I know there's a reason why I asked that one, but
would it be worth maybe just getting a minute or so explaining how I got here, or?
Oh well, yeah, absolutely. Yes, go right ahead.
So going way back, but there's a relevance for this. In undergrad, I was a double major in English and biology, English literature and biology, and people used to say, "What are you going to do with that combination?" And I said, "I'm going to be a science writer," and that's what I did. But I became interested in the ideas behind interactive design and the possibilities of words, images, and interactivity, and telling stories, linear and nonlinear, in an interactive way. So long story short, I ended up becoming an information and interaction designer. Again, trying to take back some of the ideas that I learned from science and from science journalism and apply, sort of cross-pollinate, so to speak, to Eric's Stamen point. cross-pollinate between the two disciplines. And data visualization is an incredibly important part of that. So it's always been sort of built in. I've been doing this for about 20 years in various ways. So anyway, that's a little bit of the backstory.
Right.
As far as your question about the experience, the first thing, of course, is understanding who you're talking to, or at least having some sort of level of empathy in a general way. So design thinking, which you mentioned a few times, is all about empathy and understanding the user. And I think that's the foundation for me. Now, it may not be a specific persona, but at least you have a general sense of an audience type. And so that's where I begin. I also think about the subject matter, like what's going to make the most interesting and powerful way to represent this in a kind of combination of interactivity, potentially, and words and pictures.
Interesting. And so then how do you practice design thinking in UX and data visualization? I know it kind of starts in that root of empathy, empathetic reasoning, but go a little bit deeper into design thinking in UX. Yeah,
I mean, one of the things, just to define empathy, it often sounds like it's sort of a soft and squishy term, or can be, like sort of conflated with sympathy. But empathy is ultimately really about putting yourself in someone else's shoes, understanding where they're coming from, what they're experiencing. So I think starting with understanding what the audience understands about science, what's going to connect with them, what isn't going to connect with them, it's really trying to sort of get inside their heads is the first place to start. And actually, as you mentioned, I actually teach a course in design thinking for UC Berkeley Extension.
Right.
And, I emphasize that getting inside the head first, and then doing a lot of generative thinking, a lot of ideas, as many as possible. There's this idea of diverge, converge, which is, if I can do this,
right. Yeah.
Right. You open up, you kind of start with you open up with a lot of ideas, and then you kind of narrow it down based on the audience that you're trying to connect with.
Parameters, right? Boundaries. I think speaking for myself as a designer, one of the toughest things is the blank slate, right? Starting with that blank slate, or starting without being given a certain set of, now I wouldn't say directions necessarily, but those parameters, the area within which I have to work. Like Eric had mentioned earlier, how many pages does it have to be when he was writing some material for our friend Sarah? Those boundaries kind of give you that focus of the design that you're creating, right? And I think honestly opens up the opportunities for design. I think does a lot more. Otherwise, you can just go off in any direction without necessarily hitting the point or reaching the audience or focusing on that important message that you're trying to deliver.
Well, constraints can be our friend. Constraints are a friend of artists and designers. You don't always think it that way. But I will say this. I mean, this thing, even in the classes and clients that I work with, I've seen this a lot. It's the challenge, though, is the prioritization of the constraints, or the prioritization of what you want to get across given your constraints. That's the hardest part. People can come up with lots of ideas, but how to figure out the ideas that are going to really work is something that a lot of people struggle with.
Sure.
And that's where the empathy comes in.
Yeah, and testing is important, right? Because you never start throwing bullseyes, right? I think
sometimes.
Well, he's a fortunate one.
Not often.
I'm not that. I never try to aim for bullseyes because at least aim for bullseyes right off the start, because the chance of you hitting it right away when you don't have enough information yet. Testing is such an important part of design, especially when it comes to developing products. Our whole idea, if I mentioned earlier about Astro Tours, was this going to be a business? We wanted to start with a pilot project to put enough out there in this lean principle of developing a business idea to see whether or not we really had something here. And that was in order to test and see if this pilot would give us kind of the results. How is it scalable? How is it sustainable? And scalability and sustainability are two very important aspects and principles in design. Where do you start? I know this changes probably with every project, Hunter, and every client, but where do you like to start?
Well, I was just going to say that a lot of times the story sort of writes itself. So as a science journalist, and so I basically start with a story. I mean, I think biology is just a collection of stories in a lot of ways.
Right.
And so, for example, Eric was mentioning about the bird migrations. I worked on a project in conjunction with the Monterey Bay Aquarium a number of years ago on tagging and tracking of sea creatures, primarily pelagic predators like great white sharks and so forth. And,
Right. Yeah,
and
yeah. Listen, Eric, that was you.
and one of the things that that's important about that is like the story tells itself, or like let the sharks write part of the story. So, for example, or let the genes tell part of the story. It's sort of a collaboration with the material itself. So, in the case of the sharks, they have some very unusual behaviors. There's a thing called the Shark Cafe, which is an area of the Pacific where they just sort of hang out. And for some reason, they used to hang out there, and it wasn't necessarily something that was expected, but it just turned out it showed up in the data, and then you can start to think about what are the stories to tell around that, or it's an interesting, from a journalistic perspective, a hook or angle. Shark Cafe, shark hangout area, or
people can relate to that, right?
Or genomes, like basically, we started looking at genomes, we found out that a lot of our assumptions about them were wrong. Just looking at the data, that it was not what we thought, and so that's interesting.
While you're talking, I want to bring up that website. I want to make sure that people can see this while you're talking through it. But go ahead.
Yeah, basically, the idea is that that these things can tell themselves in a sense. Like, so your goal is to sort of find this story in the data. And it's almost like what Michelangelo said, I believe, which was he released what was in the stone. He released the sculpture that was in the stone. It's not exactly like that, but basically what we're trying to do is release the accurate picture of the world and show it in a way that's digestible. And so basically this is showing the migration patterns of various types of sea creatures. Now this is not the entire offering for TOP. Part of what I wanted to do is also tell the stories of individual sea creatures. For example, a particular tagged shark. Kind of personalize it, because people are not always that good at dealing with abstractions. But if you can actually localize it to a particular turtle, a sea turtle, or a particular shark, or a particular bird, and connect that to this larger idea of migration patterns, that's where it starts to get interesting, and where from my perspective, the sort of science journalism comes in. And that for me, it's basically the pictures of these sort of tracks and so forth is a way to sort of show the huge range and expanse that these creatures cover, for example. But it's not the end of the story; it's just a part of the story.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That's really cool. I want to get to a couple of other questions here. There was a question I wanted to ask you, Hunter, but I think this also really does apply to Eric. So let's go ahead and kind of open up questions for anybody here in attending our webinar. If you have a question for either Eric or Hunter, or just for everybody, please go ahead and start posting in here. And I'm going to start with, what tools do you guys use to kind of maybe build or get started in that strategy, started on the design path? What tools do you use to kind of follow that plan and then measure your results? Eric, I'm going to start with you.
So what the tools are?
What tools specifically to kind of get started and to kind of stay on your path and then to measure the results for that?
I just dropped a link in the channel.
Okay.
A couple of them. I hope that's all right.
Sure, absolutely.
Around that, I mean, for us, if you look at that link, I posted the tagging of pelagic predators.
Oh yeah, right.
One of my favorite sites in the world.
It's great.
Just a terrific project. And I just to sort of follow up on that, I just want to say that really resonates with me as well. It's like you build a tool and then you kind of let it run and you watch it and you see what it does. And whether or not there's a Shark Cafe in there or not is kind of largely up to the data. And so I just wanted to kind of echo some of the things that Hunter was saying about it being a conversation with the data. And you try and let the data tell its own story. What I've posted in that link is kind of an older diagram, but one that I still really like. This idea that there's this kind of waterfall process when it comes to data visualization, that you need to know all the answers sort of almost before you get started. It's just not how I've found to be successful in this work. You try stuff, you backtrack, you go forward, you go back, you test assumptions. Sometimes you're right, sometimes you're wrong, and then you basically stop when you run out of money. And I think that's similar to that. You always have to be oriented towards success, and it's not just about flailing around, but it's about trying to kind of slowly move it forward and be open to the fact that you might be wrong about stuff, right? I mean, if the whole point of the project is a Shark Cafe, and it turns out that there is no Shark Cafe, well, you better try and figure out something else interesting to focus on.
If you think you can start out with all of the answers, well, nobody does, because I mean, that would eliminate the value of all discovery, right? Nobody has those answers.
Well, it's actually it's a bigger issue there. Maybe worth pointing out. There's, at least from my perspective, there's two kind of main types of data visualization in science and other places, and there's a spectrum, but one's exploratory and one's explanatory. And if I would say it's actually a danger if you think you're trying to do an explanatory data visualization. I worked for example, for Genentech for a little while, and they're looking at some basic genomic data. The more that I intervene as a designer and sort of thinking about the story or assuming the story, the more I bake it into the visualization, which could have some potentially very problematic results. So. It's for that sort of end of the process, it's better to really think hard about being as sort of light touch as possible. Now, the flip side is when you're trying to literally explain to the sort of general public a particular idea, then it's a different design kind of way of thinking or a different approach.
Eric, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, it's like looking in a mirror.
Yeah, that's why.
I'm sorry.
I wanted to have you both on for that very reason. Similar practices, but I think what's very interesting is the differences in the practice. Even though the principles that you both share identical in so many different ways, but there's still just those differences because your projects are very different. Your clients are different still, and those. But it's getting your perspective too, Eric, on that.
Yeah, I mean, my perspective is informed by this is all client services work, right? I mean, and so I'm not really in a, and it doesn't matter what principles I might try to adhere to. If UC Berkeley doesn't like it, I don't get paid. And so
there's that
sort of
too.
informed by that,
Yeah, I think scientists can identify with that too, right? To some degree. So,
but having said that, I'm also very much, I brought up the story about my origin story with the sailing, in the sense that, for me, this has always been very much about entertainment as well as analysis and rigor. And I feel like that is, I don't know if it's unique to us, but it definitely has informed my perspective. I mean, I'm not a scientist, I'm in this position of wanting to not just accurately and cleanly impart insights to neutral audiences. I'm interested in being in the rough and tumble mix of communication and the media. And I think that this idea that, this is all about a kind of neutral communication strategy, that it's all about the truth, is we're just not living in that kind of society anymore. So I think that data visualization, just because it does touch everything, has the opportunity to kind of to play a vital part in the world that we're in now.
I think one of those important roles of research is to answer these questions in a way that helps us develop better questions.
Yeah, totally.
Because the better your question becomes, the more accurate, the more elegant, the faster it is to get to those answers. And in design is very similar to science and research, because if anybody hasn't necessarily heard it already in our CoLab, the real unique connection between science and design is research, is learning. It's never finished. And this idea of I'm running this experiment not to discover that I'm right, but to discover how I'm wrong, how my hypothesis breaks, right?
And not just that you're wrong, but like in what specific way you're wrong, right? And I think that's what visualization can really help with is, you make a map of something and you show it and then you're like, well, what is that? And then it lets you sort of both discover, that I totally agree with Hunter about the different kind of ways, like exploratory and explanatory. The line between those I found can be quite dotted.
Yeah.
There's another, I think, just to add to that, data visualizations, actually the second chapter in my book is about questions. Basically the entire second chapter is about visualizations for facilitating questions. So there's a lot to think about. And so how do you formulate questions? What questions are you asking? The other thing I would say is maybe related to how am I wrong? It's not necessarily, that could be how am I wrong, but there's a sort of a subconscious layer of bias we all have, and just based on our wiring, our neurological wiring. Sure. So a lot of times things like confirmation bias. There's a lot of, it's not necessarily, visualizations can either help to sort of ramp up your biases, or they can sort of de-bias depending on how they're constructed. Survivorship bias and so forth. So it's also thinking about how do you design corrective visualizations to counter our natural and totally useful in many circumstances ways of looking at perceiving data and information.
Interesting. No, that's great.
I can give examples, but it may be too involved for right now.
Well, I think we need to come back and have another one about data visualization specifically. And this has been a request before from some of the audience members in our CoLab. If there's anybody else out there, I do have another question I want to share. Before I do that, Eric, you had put up a link, how Stamen works. I think, and that didn't necessarily come through. I just tried that link and it came up as a 403 or so. So maybe you want to kind of repost that.
Yeah, sorry.
That's no problem. So we do get questions from those that register here, and we get these questions ahead of time. We want to make sure that they get answered. I did notice that Elizabeth Hunter's link with the Shark Cafe is in that gtopp.org. Am I correct, Hunter? Is that where the Shark Cafe is visual in that?
Yeah, it's in that link, and there's some other stuff. I haven't been on this a number of years ago, so I'm not sure if the Shark Cafe is in there, but I will.
Okay. Gotcha. Right on. And Starbucks does not own it, by the way. So just so you know, that is totally, it is not a franchise opportunity, in case you're asking.
You don't want to call, you don't want to answer that call if you get called up in the Shark Cafe.
Yeah, Shark Bucks or something.
Yes.
So I got a question from Kayleen. Hello. I hope I'm pronouncing your first name right. I'm sorry if I didn't. Kayleen has been a longtime subscriber and member here of our CoLabs. She's doing some really cool stuff. She is a neuroscientist, PhD, and an animator, and she's really talented. I like a lot of her work. But she had posted this really interesting question as a scientist, transitioning to a career in visual communication, animation, graphics, and such.
I want to talk to her.
Yeah, she wants to know what the biggest thing we think is lacking in most visual science communication. What is the biggest thing lacking in most visual science communication? As maybe as a tip or a hint for her as she's developing her focus in her career, I will start by saying, I don't think there is one biggest thing in all of visual science communication. It's lots of little different things, and it really does depend on that specific client problem that you're trying to solve. And in your research, you will discover and find out by asking those kind of hard questions, what problem are they trying to solve for? But is there, Hunter, we'll start with you. Is there one thing, or is there a biggest thing that you see lacking in most visual science communication?
It's a oh, by
It's a
the way, I
tough.
just posted. I know it's not for everyone, but since there's a visual science person, I did a multimodal data visualization for neuroscience data work. I just posted a
Right.
link for anyone who's interested. As far as your question, Nick, I think from my experience, a lot of it is just the emphasis is on make it pretty, which I think is great, but it's a side effect. What's not considered as much is the actual functionality or value or utility. And so something people make a nice looking dashboard or some sort of pretty looking image, but it doesn't communicate anything. And maybe
Right.
it's because it came up through science journalism, but I really believe that the story is really important. And
So,
people
yeah.
often don't have a narrative flow, don't have a story, don't have a kind of a end result, a punchline, a thing. And I think that's really
That's a great answer. Yeah. No, I think that's I think that's accurate. Very accurate. Eric, what is the biggest thing lacking in most visual science communication, do you think?
Is it okay if I post one of Kayleen's links?
Kayleen, do you mind if we post one of your links? I would say look, she says, yes, please.
One second. It's kind of an amazing project. Everybody needs to see this. Is it going to come up? Yeah, this is totally groovy. I get to say totally groovy because I live in San Francisco. This is a project that it looks like Kayleen worked on called Weird Animal Brain.
Yeah.
I just looked at it. I mean, it just took me 5 seconds to find it. And suddenly I'm learning that a narwhal's tusk is not just used for spearing fish or breaking ice, but it's a gigantic sensory fucking organ that sends information about how salty the surrounding water is to the brain.
Wow.
It's amazing. It's like,
yeah.
that's like, so I'll just say that that's amazing. And that maybe that should have been I don't mean to critique your work, Kayleen, at all, but I just mean that's to me, that's the headline.
Yeah.
That tusk is not what you think it is, right? I mean, that's what Sarah talks about with stories, that this idea that there's that's what a headline is like you thought it was this, but it's not. It's actually this other totally amazing thing, and the kind of emphasis on that, I think, is what if I had to say one thing that's missing in most of the science communication that I see, it's just this kind of like, I think there's a hesitancy to recognize just how extraordinary some of these things that we're communicating about are.
Sure. Yeah.
And a kind of like get excited about it and lead with the part that's amazing. And I think that scientists are kind of reluctant to do that because they're trained to be sort of modest about their claims. But I think science communication is.
And I think also scientists have a practice of being very, very specific, which is important. Yeah. Designers, we go through peer review as well. It's on a different level, and we don't suffer the same publish or perish, but we still follow those same rigors of research. And for us, story, the point, the message, the hook, all of those elements are really critical to our design. You can be very abstract as long as in that abstract there is an open door or an open window for somebody, and not as covert as an Easter egg, but in some way opens that door and leads people in to go discover something about it. You hear less is more spoken an awful lot as a practice in design. I use it because I tell them the less you actually show on your website, the more apt they are to want to discover on their own. That does not apply to everybody, of course. I have creative directors that have argued with me on that aspect many, many times. But if you are going to make that abstract thing, or if you are going to be to kind of build the mystery, make sure that that mystery has an open door somewhere to go. I think, Kayleen, that your question is so valid and it's really important. And I appreciate the answers from both Hunter and Eric. I think, again, it's that, maybe not just an overarching answer of one greatest thing, because it's getting to that story and you being able to help those scientists and your colleagues and your clients understand the importance of what that story is. And the fact that you may not necessarily have the answer when you start, but you're going to discover it in that path and that design as you keep going. I've got one other question. I know we're going a little bit beyond, and I appreciate everybody stays here, but I'm going to keep going with this one question. It's being recorded, so everybody, if you have to leave, totally understand. Everyone's got a schedule, but you'll get a link for this recording so you can hear it later. So Shruti asks, how do you approach designing a product meant for multiple audiences with different skill levels and goals? For example, local government officials, the general public, and state agencies. That's a good one. How do you approach designing a product meant for multiple audiences and different skill levels? Eric?
I would say, the iPhone changed everything, because suddenly everybody has good design in their pockets, and now everybody knows what it is. And it also gave everybody something to point to that's very clearly designed for many different kinds of people with many different skills.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I would sort of take that as your kind of guide of just like, that's how good this can be if you do it right. And I would also just say that what you need to do is this kind of a balancing act of, on the one hand, you want people who are at a very high level to be able to quickly get the kind of experience that they want. And then you also want people to be able to approach what you're doing who don't have a lot of knowledge. And there's precedent for that in fields like video games. There's a whole established practice of like, you learn how to play the video game by learning something very simple in the beginning. And then as you proceed through it at your own pace, you can become very proficient very quickly and jump ahead, or you can stay on a sort of lower level. So I guess what I'd say is it's not a new problem, and it's been solved across our industry in many different ways.
Yeah, isn't necessarily one way. Hunter, how would you respond to that? How do you approach designing a product meant for different skill levels?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much my bread and butter work. Well, what I teach and what I do is I use what's called personas, or they're basically representations of different audience segments. They don't have to be perfect. They don't have to be exact, but they have to be sort of approximations of the different types of audiences. Typically, I'll design, let's say, a dashboard visualization for two audiences, executives and for analysts. Right. They have different needs. The analysts are more drilled down. They have more exploratory work. The CEOs and so forth are more explanatory. So what I do is I create personas, try and get inside each of their heads. I was talking in the beginning about empathy, trying to empathize with each one, get inside their shoes, or their heads, probably better, or worse, I don't know, and tune it to that. So I don't necessarily think that you know there's one universal design, but you can have a baseline idea, a baseline story. There's always a baseline story, in my opinion, or often, and then try to figure out how to what level of detailed information to apply based on your limited set of personas. Right. Typically, if there's going to be two or three, and I don't think that's an onerous amount of work to sort of split off and maybe target it a little bit better. Sure. You may find that the simplest one is applicable to all, but it just depends on who your audiences are. Yeah. No, that's great. It's accurate. That and like Eric said, this is a question for the ages. It's been around for quite a while, and it gets solved a lot of different ways through a lot of different practices and methodologies. And honestly, it's testing. Constantly improving. That's why there's version 386 of something, right? That's why WD-40 is not WD-39 or WD-38, right? Because they went through 40 different formulas to get to what they did, and that's how you knew it was a tried and true product and designed.
is that same thing. It's never finished, and that is that unique connection with science. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up here. I want to thank Eric and Hunter both for joining us. I really do appreciate it. There will probably be some additional questions that'll come in. If you want to stay on Twitter at #DesignForScience, we will post some answers there as they questions continue to come in. If you have any comments, please post on #DesignForScience on Twitter. For those of you attending, you'll also get a quick little email to say thanks and maybe give us some information, some feedback on our CoLab here and how we can, what you liked, what we can keep, and things that you really did not like at all that hopefully that's not me, that we will come back and improve upon our CoLabs and just make them more fun for everybody. So again, thanks to Eric. Thank you, Hunter. And their links are available in our CoLab online in the platform at Big Marker. Also wanted to let people know about a product that we are developing, SciComm Arts, where pioneers find visionaries. So scientists can reach out and meet with designers. Designers can reach out and meet with scientists. We are currently in development, and then we'll be going to testing on that product. If you want to know a little bit more about Astro Tours, please go to astro.tours. And thanks to Stamen, thanks to Ninja Communications for being contributing partners. And let's keep the conversation going on Twitter. And follow us also at SpacetimeLabs.co. Thanks, guys. Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody. Really do appreciate it.
Cheers.
And cheers. Thank you.